So, Examiners, and welcome to section 8 of the prose literature. This is the third part of the Tacitus, the finale of the Battle of Watling Street. So, straight into the action. Ac primum, and at first, the legio, immota, literally having been unmoved, just unmoved from its gradu being a fourth declension ablative, literally means step, but here translated as position, et retiens, and maintaining the angustias of their loci, the narrow spaces. A picture, next slide, to help you imagine what's happening here, but Tacitus is saying that the Romans are keeping to the narrow approach so that they can't get overwhelmed by the enemy numbers. Pro munimento, for their defence, comma, postquam, after it had exhausterat, it had exhausted their tella, their missiles, with quieto iacto, with sure, literally throw. You're going to want to translate that either as sure throws or perhaps as like sure or certain aim. In hostes, against the enemy, sugressos, as a perfect active participle, one of the very common gredior deponent verbs. So literally against the enemy, having approached Proprius closer, comma, it erupit, it burst out, velut as cuneo, as a wedge. As I note down here, legio is our nominative noun, erupit is the verb that it's actually doing. Everything else in the middle is just a lot of subclauses telling you what's happening in the meantime. So, the actual battle. Short version, we don't actually know where this is or exactly any of the numbers. Talk about that a little bit later, but we haven't really found any good archaeological evidence for this, and our sources are kind of dubious. Obviously, a battle happened, but exactly what happens, we're not clear. Tacitus is pretty obvious that Suetonius is chosen in red here, pretty good position up the top of a hill, with woods or gorges or something on either side to mean that it'd be difficult for the Britons to flank them, particularly for their chariots, which the British at the time liked to use. It's a strong defensive position, but there is nowhere to retreat. There is nowhere where an organised army could pull back from, which is very much not good tactics. Suetonius' decision works, and therefore it was a genius plan. But if he had been defeated in this battle, almost his entire army would have been destroyed. The burst out as a wedge phrase means using wedge formation. Picture here. There's actually a really nice diagram that I managed to find. The advantage of the wedge is that it will pierce through an individual line, such as all the Britons rushing on at them as a mass, whilst making it quite difficult to flank. It has its disadvantages, but this is the battle strategy that Suetonius tells his soldiers to use. Tacitus continues. The impetus of the auxiliarum, the attack of the auxiliaries, was idem, the same, i.e. they also used wedged formation. Presumably there's multiple wedges going down the line. Et eques, and the cavalry, with their hastis protentis, with their spears holding forwards, extended. They perfringit. This is quite a difficult phrase. Literally, quod obvium et validum means that which was in the way and strong. You're going to want to translate this as any strong opposition. Ceteri, the rest, praebuerunt, is what praebuere is short for. They showed their terga, their backs, i.e. they fled. Effugio difficile, for a difficult flight, quia, since, with the vehicula circumjecta, with the wagons literally thrown around but surrounding. They had seipserunt, they had blocked off the abitus, the ways out. What that means is the British had brought a large number of their non-combatants, basically to watch the battle. Also had a lot of their supplies. They had been moving almost as an armed migration, burning and looting through Roman cities. And so, confident of their victory, they had aligned their wagons, bumper to bumper, so to speak, all around to watch the battle from a distance. Now, being pushed back by the Roman charge in their wedge formations, they have been pinned against these wagons and they can't retreat very easily. Individuals can climb over the wagons, but there's just a huge, massive crush of bodies, and the Romans are just cutting into them. Continuing. Et miles, and the soldiers, ne temperabating, they weren't refraining from the necky, the quite violent word there, the murder or the killing, quidem mulierum, of even women, quae etiam jumenta, and even the animals, the beasts of burden that are bearing the wagons, confixa, pierced, with telis, with missiles, i.e. javelins, or potentially arrows. Auxerent had added to the cumulum, the mound of corporum, of bodies. Think of cumulus clouds as the big puffy clouds. The laus, the glory, pater, having been obtained, ea die, on that day, was clara et par, was clear and equal to antiquis victoriis, to ancient victories. The Romans are often a people who look back upon the past with these rose-tinted glasses, saying, oh, back in the day we used to win impressive victories, which is what Tacitus is saying here. Notice the phrase laus pater is a clear repetition of section 7, where Suetonius's battle speech was talking about victoria pater, victory having been obtained. There's an open question here of, does Tacitus approve of the actions of the soldiers or not? The phrase, the murder of women, and the fact that the Romans are apparently killing the animals and the beasts of burden for no real purpose is kind of damning. But on the other hand, calling the victory, the glory of the victory, clear and equal to ancient victories is pretty positive. Remember that ancient people would not have had the same values as modern readers. Would Tacitus's audience have cared that the Roman soldiers were killing the women after the women had done terrible things to the Roman citizens? Question. Tacitus continues with the glories of the Romans. Quippe, indeed, sunt, there are those, qui who, tradant, they relate, Paulo, a little, minus, less, quam octoginta, than 80 millia thousand Britannorum of the Britons, Cecidice, had fallen, or fell, with Thermae about quadringintis, 400 of our men, of militum, of our soldiers, interfectis, having been killed, nec and not multo amplius, much more, vulneratis, having been wounded. Boudica finivit, ended, finished, her vitam with veneno, her life with poison, obviously, bit of nice alliteration there. Notice here that Tacitus is admitting that he doesn't actually really know how many soldiers died, how many Britons died. He's just saying there are those who tell that, hence the indirect statement that we have here. Ancient battle numbers are almost always exaggerated. It seems extremely unlikely that 10,000 Roman soldiers would have been able to kill 80,000 Britons in one day and only suffer less than 1,000 casualties of any form themselves. That just doesn't seem very likely. To continue, et Poenius Postumus ipse himself, as my animation tries to get across. Notice the huge delay of this emphatic pronoun all the way till the end of this very long and quite complex sentence. The praefectus castrorum, the commander of the camp of the Secundae Legionis, of the Second Legion, with the rebus prosperis, with the prosperous or successful things, or just successes, cognitis, having been learnt, obviously an ablative absolute, the successes of the quattordecimanorum and vigesimanorum of the 14th and 20th legions, quia, since or because he had fraudaverit, he had cheated suam legionem, his own legion, from pari gloria, from equal glory, quae, and he had abnuerat, he had refused the jussa of his ducis, the orders of his general, contra, against ritum militiae, military practice, military rite, he transaget, he ran through, say, himself with a gladio, with his sword. I.e., Poenius Postumus, when he hears that Suetonius wins the Battle of Watling Street, commits suicide because he had chosen not to lead his troops out to help Suetonius fight Boudicca. Almost certainly not out of cowardice. If Poenius Postumus becomes the prefect of the camp, that means he got there all the way from being a centurion and probably from being a ranking soldier. He would have been very brave and very veteran as a soldier, and he may have thought that the orders were a trap, or just fake in general, or just that Suetonius had absolutely no chance and he didn't want to take out his own soldiers in a suicidal venture, and he wanted to preserve them. It's worth noting that Suetonius, being a career politician, needs to win battles to look good, whereas prefect of the camp doesn't really. It's also worth noting that, as I said before, Suetonius's force had been pinned into a strong defensive position, but one with no retreat. Suetonius looks like a successful general because he wins the battle. But if he had lost the battle, his entire army would have been destroyed, and Poenius Postumus would have looked like a very sensible chap, not taking his forces out on a doomed venture. Unfortunately for him, Suetonius's plan works, and therefore, out of shame, this guy commits suicide. And there you have it, the entirety of section 8, the finale of Tacitus, in a fairly vivid and dramatic battle scene. The Romans, stuck in a bad position against overwhelming odds, succeed through superior tactics and equipment, and proceed to butcher fleeing combatants and defenseless civilians. Boudicca's rebellion, which had committed so many atrocities against Roman civilians and combatants, in response to the atrocities committed against her and her people by the Romans, eventually comes to nothing. Boudicca ended her life with poison. A short, 4-word sentence to emphasize that eventually it just didn't matter. And even our poor guy Poenius Postumus, who commits suicide because he chose the wrong decision in not joining what he may well have thought of as a hopeless attempt to stop the Britons. Think about the type of questions that the examiners will set you here to analyze the text. How does he make it dramatic? How does he emphasize the Roman victory? How does he emphasize Poenius Postumus's shame that he had cheated his legion? These are all quite reasonable questions that we might be asked. Anyway, hope that helps. Thank you very much.